You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I am thrilled to be joined again by George Packer. He is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He's an author, a playwright. He is, he's one of the most thoughtful observers of that intersection of politics, policy, and culture. He has a new novel, The Emergency, which examines here's something you won't have thought of, a collapse of an empire, the impact on a family, on individuals, as well as on the society itself. It is frightening close to home. George, welcome back.
Thank you, Edwin. Nice to be with you.
Hey, before we turn to fiction, let's talk about your recent piece in The Atlantic, What Should Americans Do Now? Because you in that piece, you say a lawless regime is an illegitimate one. And I really agree with you, but that's a hard case to argue when the other side says, sorry, he actually won the election, the popular vote, so he's there legitimately. And if he subsequently broke the rules, well, there's impeachment. So how do we really make the case that this is an illegitimate regime?
I think they're making the case every day by their actions and their words. They have pretty much declared to the American people that their word, their rule is law, and that the law applies selectively to people who are for or against them in different ways. If you're for them, you're fine. You're living in the state of law that we've always lived in. If you're against them and you brush up against the agents of the federal administration, you're running the risk of arrest, of having your constitutional rights violated, and maybe injury and even death. So the illegitimacy isn't about whether there was a fair election, which there was. Of course, Trump can't accept the legitimacy of any election that doesn't give him power, but that's not the way his opponents should think. But the way I think about it is, if a regime governs in such a way that its citizens cannot be confident that the rule of law applies equally, and that at the end there can be justice through the courts, through the police, through prosecutors, through investigators, then there's no constitutional government that we can count on. That makes it illegitimate. It doesn't mean it's we're in a state of war. We're not in a state of war, but we have to recognize what kind of leader and administration, government we're dealing with, and not keep telling ourselves again and again that, oh, it seems to be getting better, or he's backed off, or there's been a de-escalation in Minneapolis. That's just, first of all, that's just the day's news. That's the reaction to the day's news. What we need to do is to be thoughtful about the trajectory and the nature of this regime. And the nature of this regime is lawless.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you. I think the age of monsters began January 20th, a year ago. And I think he's got a administration dedicated to the proposition that everything is his. That's it. And there is no rule of law. But I want to just explore this legitimacy thing, because when you say this government's illegitimate, I hear the appeal to the Declaration of Independence more than the Constitution, because there's not really and this is part of our problem, there isn't really what you call due process method for the public to claim a president is illegitimate. That, outside of constitutional remedies, the GOP doesn't even believe in anymore. So it's a complicated thing. It's hearkening back to all of those reasons we said we would break with England back then, more than anything, I think, in the Constitution.
I think what I'm trying to get at is not a constitutional finding, because you're right that there is a process for replacing a leader, and it isn't working because we have a polarized electorate and a polarized Congress and a Republican Party that refuses to understand what we're dealing with here. But it's more a way to think about it, which is that this government is behaving in a way that requires democratic-minded citizens to withhold their cooperation in certain ways that they can. Nonviolent, disciplined, but in a way to say, I do not respect, I do not observe the legitimacy of certain actions, certain demands, certain edicts, and I'm going to avoid them, or I'm going to witness them and call them to account the way the citizens of Minneapolis have done. It's a step beyond just protest. And so I know I'm saying something a little bit radical here, but we're in a radical situation, and we have to face it and then ask, what can we do? Because the question has not had an answer. I keep being asked by people, what can I do? And they're in a state of paralysis, and I'm trying to get out of the state of paralysis into a state of some kind of action.
Well, I mean, I think a mental test, I guess, is does it feel like the government, you can disagree with the government all the time because they're 350 million of us, and we definitely don't see. I don't want to live in a country where we all think exactly the same way. But does the government feel like it's our government, or does it feel like it's his government? And to the extent that they have made the case in a way that is indisputable, really, that it's his government and not ours, it ceases to be legitimate.
I think that's a good way to put it. And I would, your listeners might want to look at another Atlantic piece by a colleague and friend of mine, Jonathan Rauch, called Yes, It's Fascism.
Yeah, it's a good piece.
Which has got quite a bit of attention. And John Rauch is the most reasonable person in the country. So when he takes you through the list of 18 attributes of fascism and finds each one of them in the second Trump administration, you have to really pay attention. He doesn't say, therefore, we should do X. But once you're at the point of using the word fascism, a word I've avoided, Edwin, I have not used that word. I found it to be inappropriate, historically wrong, maybe inflammatory or sensationalist. But you go through the very cool-headed analysis of Rauch and his taking you through what a fascist regime does in terms of militarism, in terms of the rule of law, in terms of propaganda, in terms of
race, in terms of picking enemies.
Yes, ethnic nationalism.
Foreign adventurism. Yeah, all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you realize, that's Trump's second term. It was not his first term, which was something a little more American, I would say, a little more recognizably American, a demagogue. We've had many demagogues, but the second term with people like Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance around him has felt more ideologically focused. Trump himself is not an ideologue, but the people around him, he's picked loyalists who have extreme views, and they are governing as a fascist government would. And that really puts us in a difficult position where we cannot be at all sure that, for example, the midterm elections are going to be free and fair.
Yes, he has a national security presidential memorandum where he describes domestic terrorists, and what he's describing are ordinary Americans who disagree with him. And he's given in that memo new powers. Well, to the extent that he can through an executive order, but the administration will pretend that that's law, to go after protesters. I think that's why he keeps calling them terrorists. Really frightening.
Yeah, right, because what it does is it's a way to make protest and opposition illegitimate, and to say, therefore, we, the federal government, with all of our unbelievable might and weaponry and force, have to come in and stop it, and really stop it anyway we can, which is, I don't know if you saw that video of Gregory Bovino last summer in California telling his Border Patrol officers, this is our time. This is our city. When you have contact with one of them, you do what you have to. So that Miller and Trump have given a license to arm federal authorities to abuse the citizenry and to our rights because it's supposedly an emergency and it's terrorism. But this is how it becomes a sort of vicious cycle where once they behave that way, then they show themselves to be illegitimate, and citizens have to make up how to oppose that.
Well, LA is so very big that it didn't come to a head there. But when he came here to my city, to Chicago, it came to a head. And I thought Chicago would be their Waterloo. It would teach the country what they really were and help us organize against it. And so after we chased them out of the city, they did a lot of damage here. But after they left, we held trainings with people from Minneapolis and from New Orleans and from Charlotte. And then people in those cities took the lessons we learned and improved upon them and made them, and made them the resistance, if you will, something that's happening from the bottom up. And I know Trump says, oh, no, it's all paid for by George Soros. I mean, poor Mr. Soros must be broke by now. But I didn't get my check.
So what did Chicago... So, Edwin, what did Chicago learn from the occupation of federal agents in your city that you were then able to pass on?
Well, I mean, everything from the whistle brigades, right? Let's use these whistles. Let's chase them off. Let's be there. To other ways of alerting each other. To how do you organize food deliveries to people who are afraid to leave their homes, or how do you organize to get kids to and from school when their parents can't pick them up? Here we had adults who were not put in a position of terror, take kids trick-or-treating when their parents couldn't come out and do it. So we learned, and we also learned when particular neighborhoods are targeted and their economies are shattered, that people from the rest of the city should go there and have dinner and go there and shop to try and right. So we figured out things like that, and we figured out how to go to court. And here in Chicago, not only did citizens go to court, but journalists went to court too. And journalists in Chicago, and we have local news has been hollowed out all over the country, but Chicago is still very blessed with a lot of local news talent. And they're highly competitive. I want the scoop. But instead, in this emergency, they cooperated. They knew there's a photographer from one place knew his pictures would be more valuable if others took ones like it, and they would alert each other where to go. So the level of cooperation and play, and not only did it transcend those kind of boundaries, but George, in this city, and Chicago has historically been segregated. It has a long history of, like, we built a whole expressway to keep black and white people apart. But in this city, in this moment, those lines disappeared. Black, white, Hispanic, everybody saw a common foe and organized together. And it was a remarkably healing moment. And our elected officials were great. They did what they needed to do, but the opportunities for leadership existed everywhere, and ordinary citizens took them up. And that includes, in the toniest, fanciest, sort of whitest neighborhoods in this city, people running out of their homes in their pajamas early in the morning to shoo ICE people off, and those videos being seen by the folks in the Latino communities that were most hammered, and a sense of gratitude running both ways. So, we packaged this up, how to litigate.
And even in a city the size of Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. But
because it seemed like in Minneapolis, the part of what succeeded was the deep ties of neighbors in a relatively small city and in neighborhoods of a small city, South Minneapolis, whereas Chicago is huge, both geographically and in population. But it sounds like some of the tactics were applied across a big city.
Yeah. And they took them and they improved on them in Minneapolis. I mean, I think it's, we want to protect our neighbors, but that is a feeling that people all over the world have. There's something uniquely American of, you know what else? We don't like to be pushed around. We are not interested in a thug or a gang with a bunch of guns coming in and telling us where to drive our cars or what we can take a picture of. That is just uniquely un-American, that we have no interest in that, and we're not about to bow down to it. So,
and this is sort of the question that I was thinking about when I wrote the piece that you were talking about.
Yep.
How do you create a mass movement? How do you turn this into something that Americans can be part of, which must remain local? It has to happen locally, and it has to happen among people who know and trust each other, or at least trust each other without knowing each other, and who are able to keep the discipline which nonviolence requires, and also the focus, so that it doesn't dissolve into 100 different issues that a bunch of factions are each pushing until they divide themselves and start going to war with each other. How do you keep it something focused on what you're describing, which is, I want to help my neighbor, I don't want to be pushed around, and I believe that America stands for something called democracy? Very big, basic things. I called it basic decency in my piece because I wanted a phrase that was not ideological, not even very political, because this is something that has to be able to embrace people who politically might not want to be part of the same thing. And I heard from someone whose mother is in Chicago and had stopped going to the anti-ICE protests because she didn't really like the company that she found herself in. And thank God she read my piece and said, I better get back out there. So she went back out.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
George, I think part of the answer to your question of how do we do it is that the administration's doing it for us, as you said before. They are giving us such a breach of what it means to be America from the top, that we are sort of revisiting these things. But your sense that if this is a partisan moment, it could fail, I completely agree with. But I noticed here in Chicago, I mean, in some of these neighborhoods where people were coming out and saying no, they got a lot of Republican voters. And I know that I went to a No Kings rally here this summer with Republicans. And we stood 40 feet away from a tent that said Communist Party of America. And, everybody rolled their eyes, but we were all in the same place.
Right.
I think this is not a Democratic brand has been tarnished. I don't think this is a Democrat versus Republican moment in America. I think it's an America versus MAGA moment. And
I've read that in Minneapolis, a lot of Latinos who voted for Trump, because his support among Latinos was almost 50% in 24. They were part of it because they are regretting their vote and seeing that their own neighbor, their own family is being harassed and detained and having their rights violated. So I do think it's something that, but that means whatever this movement is has to be very careful not to emphasize things that are going to be divisive, and instead to keep the focus broadly on MAGA and the move toward an authoritarian country.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure the polling agrees with both of us, because most Americans, this democracy idea is complicated, and not everybody spends as much time thinking about it as you and I do. I kind of say to them, like, we aren't going to agree. Like, we could disagree. There's going to be plenty of things that I want to do that aren't what you want to do. But at least let's just preserve the right to be disagreeable with each other about this stuff. And that gets at this democracy thing you're talking about. But there is no way we'll stop people from. And I don't want to stop them from arguing about the thing that's their thing. I just want to say, and I'm going to argue about what's my thing. And for the moment, we have this tent that we can all argue in, and let's keep it. I mean, a weird thing, an amazing thing happened. During this siege in Minneapolis, they had held a special election for a state legislative seat. And like something unheard of. Okay, there's a candidate named Meg Lugar Nicolai. It's not a seat that's up for grabs. A Democrat was going to win it. But George, she got a Putin vote. I mean, she got more than 95% of the vote.
Right.
Right? 90. I think, what kind of an election is that? But that's how pissed off people are, and how demoralized the other side is.
Right. And I think you're right that the word democracy is this huge abstraction that's been repeated so many times that people may just tune it out. But to see a woman shoved to the sidewalk by a guy in camo with tactical gear on, and then another guy who's trying to help her up, grabbed, thrown to the ground, and shot 10 times.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with democracy, but you don't need to say the word. You just need to say human decency.
That's wrong. That's wrong.
People know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And they knew, by the way, they know it in the most Republican districts in Georgia. They know it everywhere. Mm-hmm. Which is why this dangerous president of ours, hems and haws and says, I'm going to be conciliatory, and buys time and threatens to bomb Iran and does whatever he does to try and get out of it. But I think he's cornered. And
but he can't help himself. Edwin, he cannot help himself. He's already back to calling Alex Preddy an insurrectionist and an agitator, because that's who Trump is. He is an authoritarian. He does not believe in decency, in consultation, in compromise, in a variety of voices. It's his way. And he's surrounded by people who are putting that into practice every day by this massive, powerful thing called the federal government. So people are going to run into that more and more. And you don't have to be a Hmong refugee or a Latino family in order to experience it personally. It's going to happen more and more in people's lives.
Well, I mean, George, speaking of, it's all his. What do you make of him suing the United States personally for $10 billion? And who has to defend the United States? Pam Bondi is going to say, no, sir, you can't have your $10 billion. Should probably go to court and settle it for $7 billion tomorrow and just cut him a check of our money.
I think, yes, he has sued several agencies of his own government, the Justice Department earlier, and now this. So, yeah, I guess he's finding novel ways to squeeze money out of our taxes and to turn them into his own family's profit, and to use government policy to enrich the family. So corruption is part and parcel of authoritarianism, because once again, the rule of law doesn't apply if you have power. It's all about power and what you are willing to do with it. And the really interesting thing to me, Edwin, is it's not as though Trump has invented powers. He has seen powers that were lying around to be used, and that previous presidents, in almost every case, did not use, because they knew that it would destroy the democracy if they did. And even Richard Nixon had to lie and cover up in order to stay in office, because he knew that it was unconstitutional and the public would not stand for it. Whereas now what we have is happening in plain sight. Because Trump has decided, I'm not going to observe any of these restraints. Why should I? I can enhance my power, enhance my wealth if I use this, and only a sucker wouldn't.
I talked to a guy last week on this show named Abraham Newman. He's a wonderful professor in the School of Foreign Services at Georgetown. And his idea is that we're not entering an era of great power rivalry, which is what a lot of us have been thinking. He said you have to think about it differently. You have to think of it as neo-royalism. These guys are creating personal governments where the money goes to them personally, where they personally decide who will make a fortune and who won't, because that's how they get their court that will help keep them in power. And when you think that way, you say, well, you don't need, great power rivalry time in history was when they raced to create great universities. They raced to build their economies because they needed to be strong for that rivalry. Whereas the royalists need their countries to be wrecked in order to pull the money themselves. And look what happened to Russia with Putin. So, I mean,
Yeah. In other words, yeah, I guess some people call it patrimonialism,
Yep.
where there's a kind of
Yep.
personalized state that belongs to the leader and his family and is their own private property. And the way Trump destroyed part of the White House without any procedure, without any review, and without any public input, as if it belonged to him personally,
isn't that just
in order
repulsive?
to build, in order to build this grotesque ersatz Louis XIV ballroom
Right.
that will be his own personal property.
ballroom, yeah.
That shows the utter contempt for the idea that any of it is the public's
Is ours.
property, the public's.
It's his. Yeah, his, not ours.
It used to be, it was called the People's House,
It
the White
was.
House. And that's why it was kept rather modest by world power standards. It doesn't look like the Kremlin because it's the people's house, but now he wants it to look more like the Kremlin, and so he's bulldozing it and building it according to his own vulgar tastes.
And putting that gold leaf all over everything. So, look, Americans have shown, I mean, here in Chicago and in Minnesota, that we are willing to show up. We're willing to disobey orders. We're willing to endure their barking, and even willing, as Alex Preddy was, to die for our country. And we have two martyrs now in Minneapolis to prove it. For me, this now raises a couple of questions. The right in America has used martyrs a lot in their cause. They tried to make Ashley Babbitt a martyr to their cause. This is a woman who was shot trying to overturn the election in 2020. But we're not so good at it on our side. And I think there are two sort of questions now that we have two martyrs in a matter of weeks. Will we force Congress to act? Will they even attempt to really rescind the BBB funding that gives? I mean, let me say this differently. You saw that piece in the New York Times this week that detailed the kind of surveillance technology and military weaponry that this police force has in our country. Will we say it's okay to have massive surveillance of Americans, a massive police force using that surveillance, and a domestic concentration camp system to throw us all into, or not? Congress has a chance to do something about that. So that's out of question one. I want to know what you think, whether they're up to it. The other is, will the Trump administration react to our pushback, like the mullahs in Iran who recently killed 10,000 protesters, who, by the way, were emboldened by Trump, who said, "Come out, because I'll protect you." Will they act like that, or will they act like the CCP at Tiananmen Square? And that, and then I'm going to ask you what I've asked every single person I've talked to for a year. When he gives that order, will American troops shoot Americans?
So the first question is more within kind of the realm of our experience.
Yep.
I'm thinking back to 1964, 65. And when you use the word martyrs, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were martyrs for civil rights.
4 girls in a
Medgar
church in Alabama.
And 4 girls in Birmingham. Medgar Evers in Mississippi. They were all martyrs. And their martyrdom, it's a word I'm a little uncomfortable with because I associate it with violent reactions. Martyr is a word I heard a lot when I was reporting in Iraq and in the Middle East, and it always sent a little shiver up my spine. But they are martyrs. And in that case, and finally on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma in 65, no one was killed, fortunately, but they were certainly bludgeoned to within an inch of their lives. That moved the public, and the public moved Congress, and we had the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts. And that was a time when Congress was capable of acting because the parties were not so ideologically dug in that they were able to work together. And in fact, there were liberal Republicans, and of course, there were conservative Democrats in the South. And through the mastery of Lyndon Johnson and through the sacrifice of the civil rights marchers, we did change our country and got closer to being a true democracy.
In that moment, George, they could have said, as I fear you're about to say, look, we can have status quo. We just have to change the law so that we stop blowing up churches with little girls in them, and so that we don't beat people on bridges, but we'll keep the status quo. That was a choice they could have made, but America said to them that would be a betrayal of our ideals, and they actually went further, right? And they did those two laws that you're talking about. We're in that same moment where some in Congress say, you know what, we'll just give ICE some more body cameras and some rules, and we'll be fine. And that would be the same kind of betrayal.
I think that we're closer to being that country and that Congress now, because we are. The 1960s looks pretty good compared to where we are. I would say we are now closer to the 1850s, where we have what William Seward called an irrepressible conflict coming, a kind of building up of pressure year by year, martyr by martyr, violent incident by violent incident, incendiary speeches, etc., where each side feels the other is an existential threat to everything it cares about. And that can only lead to one thing, which is violence on a large scale. We're not going to have a civil war. There's not going to be a Fort Sumter. There won't be armies facing off on fields and ditches. But what we do seem to have is no way out, because the parties are so entrenched, and the Republican Party is Donald Trump's party. It's no longer a party of coalition and of diverse opinions. It is now a cult with a few dissenters who really barely make their voices heard. And in order to do that, they almost have to be on their way out, like Senator Tom Tillis, in order to say what is so obviously true. So I don't look too much to the day-to-day maneuvering and tactics going on in Congress, where for a moment it seems as if, we're going to have body cameras and a different head of Border Patrol or ICE in Minnesota. I think it's
replacing Bonnie with Clyde. Yeah, it's just
much more important to look at the long-term trajectory of this regime, which is based on its own nature and its control of so many institutions that used to be independent, including Congress.
Okay. And
sorry.
No,
that's bad. That's bad news, I know, but I would love to go back to 1964 if we could.
Yeah. All right. And the other one, is Trump would he react like the mullahs? Will he send the?
I have some faith in the U.S. military.
Me too.
As a professional, nonpartisan, non-political force. And when you think about who kept Trump in check in his first term, it was generals. It was members of the armed forces. Those guys are mostly gone, and the people who Hegseth has replaced them with are much likelier to be politicized soldiers, unfortunately.
And there are no lawyers to tell them where the boundaries are.
Yeah, but I still think we're not there. I don't think that if the 101st Airborne is sent to Chicago and told you need to put this down, whatever it takes, I don't think that 19-year-old privates and corporals are going to be aiming their weapons at families, at children, and shooting. We're not there yet, and I hope we never get there.
I hope we never get there. All right. Look, the last time you and I had a conversation was definitely not about books, but somehow we ended up talking about the Magic Mountain at some length, because, I think both of us found surprised to find that somebody else actually loves that book and thinks it's great. But now you've gone ahead and written another novel. And so let's just talk about that for a minute, because, and don't give away the end, because I've gotten, I'd say 3/4 of the way, but I'm not quite done. But the idea of living in normal times that are falling apart feels amazing to me. Like, yeah, I get that. The main character, Dr. Rustin, is talking about the limit. It's a sort of what are the limits of merit and of reason in this world that we live in, and how that can lead you astray. And then you have this thing that just I took my breath away, called the suicide spot, which is the only place where truth is ever really told, I think. And of course it feels very Orwell, but so do our times. So just talk about, like, why did you write this book, and did it help you to write it?
Well, I've written 2 novels way back when that were not raging successes. I became a journalist. I have been doing that now for almost 3 decades.
Yep.
And I just began to feel, at least for a while, around the time of the pandemic and January 6th, that I was reaching to diminishing returns, that I was sort of saying the same thing again and again, reading the same thing again and again, speaking to the same people again and again who agreed or who saw it that way, and completely unable to get other people who didn't see it that way to think again. We live in different realities now. People have their own worlds. And I began to have fictional impulses, let's say, Edwin. During the pandemic, I began to think, what if this drive I'm taking from New York City up into the farm country of the Hudson Valley, what if I was actually crossing almost like a battle line? If I was hitting checkpoints along the Taconic Parkway, where each town had its own little militia, and they wanted to know who I was and what I was doing there, and wanted to see papers. And that felt a little true. Like, that's kind of how it feels between the blue and red parts of the country. And it especially felt that way during the pandemic. And so I began to imagine a story about a doctor in a city, in an empire, no place that you can recognize, no time you can recognize. It's an allegory, it's a fable. So it is a bit like 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale or The Plague, lots of literature like that. What would happen to this doctor, who's a decent, humane person, but who is sort of completely a creature of this old world, the empire? When the empire collapses, what happens to his relationship to his family, especially his teenage daughter, who is moving into a new sort of worldview that's part of a youth rebellion in the city, and he doesn't like it, but he wants to keep his relationship with her? What happens to his relationship to people out in the countryside, rural people who he knows, farmers, and who now are also undergoing a kind of rebellion among their young people? And how do you keep these ties, these human relationships, when you see the world, you just see the basic facts of the world in completely incompatible ways, and where the old world that he grew up in and tried to pass on to his children no longer seems to work or even to exist? How does that man survive? And how does that community and that society survive? So that's the story that I am telling in the emergency. Yeah.
Well, it's I mean, I live in this world of nonfiction, but I firmly believe that some truth is best told through fiction. I always have. I mean, and that's been true of humanity since we invented theater, right? Years ago. I mean, there's just millions of years ago, thousands of years ago. I don't know what conversations they were having when they painted Altamira. But sometimes truth requires art and fiction, and there are a lot of things there. I mean, that scene when the daughter is speaking in the suicide spot, and the dad's in the audience, but that really took me.
Yeah, let me explain to listeners what that is.
Yep.
It's near the beginning of the novel. So there is this youth movement in the city that is a kind of overthrow of the existing structures, institutions, and of the old. And the teenagers in the city build a gallows right in the middle of the city, a true wooden gallows where young people stand on the trapdoor and put the noose around their neck while a crowd is watching from below. And they undergo a kind of almost a therapy session with their peers who talk to them about their parents, about why this older generation has failed them and what they want out of the new world. And they try to talk them sort of through and out of the idea of hanging themselves. And it's as if, teen mental illness, which is a big issue in our world, becomes this public thing, something that has to be acted out and resolved in front of a crowd. And so the doctor's daughter one day is up on the gallows. She doesn't know he's in the crowd watching, but he is. He's been essentially disgraced at his hospital because of certain wrong acts. And so he is looking for a way to try to kind of find his place in the city now. And he follows her to this suicide spot. She's standing up on the gallows and she's talking to him without knowing that he's there in the crowd watching. And what she's doing is telling him how he failed her. And he has this kind of bizarre reaction, which is both horror, of course, and guilt, but also pride, because she's so smart and articulate, and he wants to turn to the people around him and say, "That's my girl up there." He doesn't do that. That's his impulse. Yeah. So it's sort of, that's the sort of scene, Edwin, that a journalist doesn't get because it doesn't exist. A novelist can invent, and it helps to have it be a novel set in a very strange time and place. So the farther away you get from us, in a way, the more clearly you can see us with fresh eyes. That's the whole idea, is to estrange our world in order to make it come clear. And that's something that only fiction can do.
Yeah, it makes it safe to look in the mirror. Yep.
Yeah.
It does. Well, I look forward to finishing it, which I will probably do in the next couple of days. It is a good read. I congratulate you. It's very hard to write a novel.
I've been told it's cost people some sleep. It keeps them up at night. It is a bit of a thriller as well as a political allegory. So I hope listeners will pick it up and give it a chance.
Well, all right. So from fiction back to the real world. Okay, so it's safe to look at ourselves. So very hard to be honest, except when a noose is around your neck. And I feel like the noose is around our neck. The whole country is marched to the suicide spot. And we now have a chance to say, well, like, what do you really care about? What do you really think? And I in Minneapolis, Americans are answering that. They are standing there with a noose around their neck, and they're saying, "No, we're not going that road." And so, I'm a little more optimistic, I think, than you about where we're headed. In part because I don't see this as a partisan moment anymore. I don't see it as Democrats versus. Those are the actors in D.C. for sure. But I don't see that in the country. Yeah. That's not how this defense of what we care about is organized.
Well, I'm with you on that. I think the key thing is for people to hold in their mind a very difficult thought, which is this is not normal and it's not going to get back to normal. It's really hard because we don't want that. We want things to return. We want it to settle down. Oh, there's some good news today. Homan has been sent there to replace Bovino. Maybe things will get better. That's the sort of naive, I would say, slightly illusory way of thinking about it, because we are not in a normal state. And once you get into that frame of mind, you begin to understand things maybe better and more clearly. And then you begin to ask yourself the question, then what can I do? If it's not going to return on its own, what can I do? Because it's actually everyone's responsibility to do something once we accept that it is not going to return on its own.
Well, that's going to be it for us today, George. We're out of time, I'm afraid. And I'd like to explore more about what we can do. So maybe we'll have this conversation again. But I enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me.
You bet.